So he walks in the room, he introduces himself, we introduce ourselves, and then he just starts talking about Jesus, but he can't stop crying. Like, he can't say that name without crying. And I just remember thinking, like, this grown man is up here crying about Jesus. Like, this must be real.
I'm here today with Ann Wilson, and her new book is out, My Jesus, From Heartache to Hope. Girl, beautiful cover. First of all, how fun.
Thank you.
This book, it's not only about her hit song, My Jesus, that I'm sure you've heard, but it unpacks the story. And I was just very impressed with how vulnerable you were willing to be. I think that's hard for anybody.
Yeah.
But you also shared your brother with us in such a sweet way that I felt like I knew him. I felt like I got to understand your relationship better.
So sweet.
So what was it like for you to put this story out and to open up your grief for people?
Yeah. Well, first I'll just say thanks so much for having me. It's so good to be here. I guess I'll just start from when I released the song My Jesus. I started to see within like 24 hours, it just blew up and had millions of views on Facebook. And I was not expecting that. And obviously just that was not the point of me putting out the song. I just put it out as my first, radio single. And all of a sudden I started to see how people were messaging me saying like, hey, we lost our son 10 years ago and we turned our backs against God, but then we just listened to your song and we automatically gave our lives to God and like let go of our anger towards him. And it was like
that was happening immediately?
Immediately. Someone messaged me about how they were addicted to drugs, heard my song, literally turned their car on and checked themselves into a rehab, like in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And so it was just one thing after the other where I started to see this wasn't just a song, but there was something more behind this song. It was clearly God using it, but I just felt very compelled to write a story and really go into depth and write a book for it. So we started writing the book about a year ago now. And so only a few months after My Jesus had come out. So the book is really about like the story behind the song, but more than that, it goes into the background of my life, my childhood up until now. And it does talk about my struggles and just everything we've been through as a family. But
thank you for being as honest as you were. I think people need that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember right after my brother passed away and I was called into music by God, I just had this feeling of like, I don't want to be fake and I don't just want to be another artist, but that I want to be vulnerable and real because that's what impacts people and we need that. And so, and that was really, it was hard to write this book. I had to go into the depths of my heart, my memories with my brother. I had to work through some stuff in counseling through writing this book.
That's a great idea. I kind of thought it's almost a cathartic process to go, I'm going to recount the day my brother got in a car accident and the day we found out and the first holidays and to even recount how your family did it. You have to go back there. And I know that must have been very hard.
It was really hard. It was actually, I was doing counseling and writing the book at the same time. So it was perfect. And it helped me through some really traumatic things. But I think the whole point of the book, it's called From Heartache to Hope. And it's really just about how God can bring something beautiful out of nothing and what he did in my family's lives. And so really the book just goes into detail of every miracle that God performed in our life. And it's been so cool to see how it's been impacting people so far. And just, it's just been amazing. So
before we get to some of the heartache and then moving on to hope, can we go back to your childhood? Because you grew up in the church, in a Presbyterian church, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about as a young girl being so impacted that your parents watched, what was it, a movie like called The Gospel of John?
Yeah.
And you would watch it at your house and it seemed like God got a hold of your heart from a very young age.
Yeah.
But do you remember a certain key moment when you were younger and God kind of becoming real to you personally?
Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian house where the Bible was always being talked about and my mom and dad were always praying over me, but I think it had to become my own faith just like it does for everyone. And that was in 7th grade. So my whole childhood up until 7th grade, especially like 5th and 6th grade, I just kind of was starting to stray away from God.
Those are hard years for everyone.
Hard years.
Even 7th grade.
Yes.
I would not redo
temptation. Yeah. A lot of temptation, a lot of peer pressure. But I just felt like I was just being pulled in this direction. And it was my very first day of 7th grade school year. And we had a brand new Bible teacher come to our school. I went to a very small private Christian school. So
I did too, girl. Yes, sheltered.
I loved it.
We've made it.
I know. But at the time, it was like super weird to have a new teacher. So we were just, excited. And so he walks in the room, he introduces himself, we introduce ourselves, and then he just starts talking about Jesus, but he can't stop crying. Like he can't say that that name without crying. And I just remember thinking, like, this grown man is up here crying about Jesus. Like, this must be real. Like, everything I've been taught as a little girl must be true and real. And so I just remember feeling the Holy Spirit and his presence. And I just immediately after school went home and I told my mom about everything that I learned that day, and I gave my life to Jesus. And that was really just like a powerful moment where I just fell in love with God, and I was pursuing him heavily. And so God got me like right at the perfect time, because I didn't go into those wild phases of stuff that a lot of people do, which is not a bad thing. It's part of growing, but went into that phase. And then, you know, throughout high school, I was just so in love with God. But then that's when my brother passed away, summer going into my sophomore year of high school. So 3 years after I had asked Jesus to come into my heart. And I think it was just really, you know, it was a tragic time, you know, losing someone you love that close to you. But it was so beautiful to see how God was just strengthening my heart through it all and shifting my perspective on things that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't have lost Jacob. And then obviously now leading into a book and a song and a record and all the things that God's done in my life through it. So to hopefully, like, when he first died, like, that was my goal. Like, I want to touch people's lives. Like, I want God to use my story. And he's done exactly that. So,
and even for God to use Jacob's story, like,
it's really sweet.
We don't know him, but like, you are sharing him with the world, and Jesus is being honored and proclaimed through him and his story and his life. And I can't imagine a better way to honor him. And I remember in the book, you talk about like the day after the accident, you guys are driving to go get his belongings out of the truck, I think it was, unfortunately, and your mom turned on the radio or something like that, and Even If from Mercy Me was playing, and I can't imagine, like, I'd almost be like, not the right time, Mercy Me. Like, I really don't really want to hear that right now. But you guys had this conversation of, are we going to run from our faith and be angry at God, or are we going to dig in? Can you take us to that moment and how the song played a part in it?
Yeah, that was probably one of the most vivid memories. My mind blocked a lot out, but that was one of the most vivid memories I still have to this day. My brother died on impact, and so his truck was, you know, completely destroyed. And I never saw it with my own eyes, but my mom and dad did. And we were on our way to the towing company to get the truck and to look at it, get his stuff out of it. And that's when we stopped at McDonald's. My mom and dad love Diet Cokes. Like, it's their favorite thing ever. And they only drink them from McDonald's.
So they go like 5 times a day. That. I do not get it. Must be really good.
So we stopped there, and that was the first time that was the first time my dad had drank anything in over 24 hours, because we couldn't drink water. We couldn't drink or eat anything. And so my mom, as he's in McDonald's, my mom turns on the radio, and we only ever listened to Christian radio growing up. And that was a huge part of what made me who I am today. But Even If came on, and it was those first words, sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. But right now I'm losing bad. And then just kept going, you know, on, and how even if you don't make something good out of this, even if you don't heal, or, you know, the story behind that song is that he had cancer, and he was just like, even if you don't heal me, my hope is in you alone. And that was exactly what we needed to hear in that moment of, are we going to choose to ditch God and do this by ourselves, or are we going to choose to have faith and trust that he has a plan? And so my dad got back in the car right when the chorus hit of the song, and he just kind of stopped. And so me and my mom had already had encounters with God where we were like, we're going to trust you. But my sister and my dad had not. And so that was their moment of choosing to trust. And it was just a moment where, as broken as we were, we just knew in our hearts that we were going to get through it. It was just this feeling I can't explain in words, but looking back now, it was clearly the Lord just, you know, saying like, you're gonna get through it. I'm gonna give you what you need to get through. And and it also just goes to show how powerful music is, and specifically Christian radio, and how a song can immediately change your life in a moment and give you the hope that you need. And that song did that for our family.
What is it like knowing now that God is using your voice in a car for somebody who may be in a similar situation, a different one, and he's using the lyrics in the exact moment someone needs it? What do you do with that? How do you process it?
It's so surreal for me. I genuinely grew up on Christian radio. Like, that was it. And I remember when Lauren Daigle came out, I was just obsessed. Like, I love her so much.
Who wasn't?
And like, I just remember being in the car and would listen to her songs all the time. And the hope that I would receive from listening to Christian radio was just amazing and like fulfilling. But then when I remember the first time I heard My Jesus on the radio, it's so weird. Like I don't even believe that it's actually happening because it's like that's my voice and that's my song
coming out of something that I consume regularly.
Yes, yeah, and it was crazy. But I think what's really cool about it is just that God can use anyone and do anything with anyone, and to see how He's taken me out of anyone He could have chosen is just like. It's just so humbling, and it just reminds me constantly of how good He is and how faithful He is. And so it's really, really sweet. It's also bittersweet in a sense because, like, I wouldn't be here today without the loss of my brother. And I would trade it all to have him back. So It's this middle in between of, like, I'm so grateful for what I get to do, but I really miss my brother at the same time. And so I think working through that has been a challenge. But it is just so sweet listening to my songs on the radio, knowing that God's using them to impact lives.
Yeah, and He really is.
It's just, I'm just so grateful. So
it's a special full circle moment, but I love that you're talking about you hold both things at all times, the joy of it and the grief together.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that do that on a regular basis. And we're about to hit Christmas, and you talk about your first Christmas without your brother. I mean, I'm so grateful you would share all of this with us. It's why the book is so important. But what would you say to somebody who the holidays they don't necessarily bring up the joyful feelings they want because there is a missing person in the car or at the table? Do you have any advice for them as you've done it? I think you said for 5 years now. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't get any easier, but is there anything you would say to someone before the holidays?
Okay, I think the holidays are the worst part of the year, like, for everyone. I remember, like, my counselor being like, did Jacob die in Christmas time? And I was like, no, he died in June. And it's like, she couldn't figure out why at first. Like, what is it about the holidays? And I think it's the whole concept of the family time. Because you think about it, like, holidays, if you live far away from your family, that's the only time you see your family. And that's the only time you come together as one big family. And, Jacob was 8 years older, so he was always in high school when I was in elementary, or he was in college when I was starting high school. And we were always super far apart, and it just always it was like the one time a year that we would connect and get back together. And so Christmas was so brutal. I talk about it in the book, the first Christmas, where we almost drove off of a bridge, literally, as a family together in the car, and the moment of that and the grief of Christmas. And this upcoming Christmas is the first time where I haven't felt severely depressed and literally, like, just weighed down by depression. And so there is hope at the end. Like, God will redeem, He will restore, He will give you that joy back. And I really believe that if I have kids one day, that'll help bring that joy back, like I did when I was a kid. But I think for me, it was realizing that, one of the ways that I coped with it was, we didn't decorate for a while, which seems kind of depressing for most people. Like, you wouldn't decorate, but it was a relief. Like, we didn't want to be reminded. Yeah, we didn't want to be reminded. And then when we started to decorate, we did things differently. So instead of putting up our childhood ornaments, we started doing a theme, whether that be whatever it was, but we landed on an animal theme because Jacob loved animals. And so we have deers because he loved to deer hunt and duck hunt. And so we have little, like, stuffed deers and ducks now all over our tree.
Wow.
And so the house is decorated, but in a way that we think Jacob would have wanted it to be decorated. And so it's doing little things like that where you can distract yourself from it to get you through, but then also just, I think it just taught us the meaning of Christmas all over again. I grew up, in a house where we were always taught the story of Jesus and the birth of Jesus. But I think we're being reminded of how He came into the world as humble as He did, and the beauty of that, and knowing that, like, it's His birthday. Like, that's what Christmas is, and it's celebrating Jesus and His birth. And that was just always really that was just powerful for us, like, after we lost Jacob, remembering that. So I think if you just fix your eyes on Him during the holidays, it helps you get through that pain. But it does take time to get through that initial, like, hurt of it, where you can get to the point where you're excited again, and
like,
and
to know that it's years
forward. Yeah, I mean, it's years. This is our 6th Christmas without Him, and this is the first Christmas that we're doing gifts again and that we're decorating. And so it's like God's healing, and He's redeeming and restoring, and it's really beautiful to see. But there's still that pain that's still lingering, you know.
But it's helpful to know that Christmas doesn't have to bring joy and giddy and all that stuff. I think when those are the expectations, then we feel even more disappointed. But when the expectations are to see God be his name, Emmanuel, God with us, and that's different. So thank you for putting our eyes on that before the holidays. Something that Anne shares that I would have never known in the book is that you wanted to be an astronaut. NASA girl. I love your dreams. Your brother loved your dreams. What was it like for God to literally say, you're not going to outer space. You're going to be on a stage singing. And you had that massive shift, which I think many of us have, but God did it in the midst of the tragedy of your brother. So what was it like for you to give that up? Do you miss the idea of NASA, or are you pumped to do this instead?
It was kind of hard at first. I think it was also just because I was grieving Jacob. But I sang at my brother's funeral for the first time in front of anyone, and I remember hearing God's actual voice say to me, and this is what I'm calling you to do. I'm calling you to praise and worship my name.
So clear.
So in that moment, I knew that it was gone. Like, I knew whatever's happening right now, whether that means God wants me to be a worship leader at a local church or what I'm doing now, like, this whole astronaut thing is just done. And I had to accept it and be okay with it, which took some time to, like, be okay with it. But
it was not your plan.
No. And I continued to, like, pursue it in a sense of just, like, if I had free time, that was, like, what I did was, you know, still looking into colleges and then just seeing what happened because we had no idea. And then when I signed a record deal and graduated high school, it was like, okay, God's clearly doing something. And I just kind of had to let it go. And I just remember having this moment of praying and just asking God, like, you know, Lord, would you just remind me of why you took this out of my heart? And then I started to read scripture about how the Lord created all the planets and the stars literally just for us to know his goodness and that he's real and his beauty. And that's in scripture. And I was just like, that's why. It's not my place to go explore it right now, but, like, I can still delight in his creation and do that from earth. And that I needed to do work on earth more than I needed to up there. Like, that my calling was to lead people to him here on earth. But I was at NASA actually this past weekend. And it was crazy. We went to Houston and we had a show in Houston and we got to meet with an astronaut, and he was in space in 2017 in the International Space Station for 6 months.
Were you like, take me with you next time?
Yes. And I asked him, I was like, so tell me about, like, is it going to be possible for humans to go to space? And he said that NASA has a goal in the next, like, 20 to 25 years where you could buy a ticket and actually go to space as a person. Now, the tickets are probably like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Save up now.
But I'm going to start saving now so that I can go in
that would be
years.
So amazing to look at it and be like full circle. Because you don't know what God's going to do in the future. Yep. And as we close, one of my favorite quotes from the book is, whatever you're feeling, God can handle all of it. The tears, the screams, the questions. God invites you to let him tend to your heart. And I love that you said that because I literally was talking to some moms at my church this morning and I said, sometimes I feel like I am so needy that I annoy God, and he's showing me that's not the case. But I think at some point we feel like we're too much in that moment. And so can you tell us how you learned this lesson, that it was that God is never frustrated with it. He can handle all of our stuff.
I always remind myself of how God created us in the beginning and how he understands us. He understands the deepest parts of our hearts, and he understands us more than we understand ourselves. And that's a big thing of, like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I have this vision for my future. I want to do this or I want to do that. And then God's like, no, because I know what you need. You don't know what you need. I know what you need. I know what, your future looks like. I've already have that in store for you. And I think for me, it was realizing that God knew me better than anyone else did, and so he can handle every part of me. He's the one that designed us. Like, he crafted each and every one of us with a purpose and a mission, and that we're unique and special and that we're beloved in his eyes. And so anything that we come to him with, he can handle. And I used to think that too, like I've got too many needs for God. I'm praying too much or asking him for too many things. But realizing that it's never too much for God. He can handle it, that he is incredibly gracious, incredibly kind. And I think he would rather us come with our needs like that again and again rather than us just never talking to him at all. Like, I think the biggest perspective shift for me was realizing that he is my father and that I can talk to him just like I would anyone else in my life, that I can just talk to him in the car and that he's going to be right there and he's going to listen. And so it's just a beautiful reminder that he can handle everything, and that you don't need to be afraid to go to him and be honest with God, and because he knows what you're thinking anyway.
That is so good. And the car is where I talk to him a lot too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that as you're listening to this, that you may have talked to God in the car, and maybe Anne's song has been in the background. And so thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, your life, your story,
thank you.
and your songs. And so we're going to continue to be a fan and cheer you on.
Thank you so much.
We're just delighted that you would be with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.